Now, well, we're going to convene this meeting of the GPAC. Let's stand for the pledge to the flag. And Ms. Angela Torres, will you please lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Stephanie, will you do roll call?
Yes, thank you. Committee Member Arceo? Okay. Chair Lopez?
Here.
Torres?
Here.
Vice Chair Wilbert?
Here.
Kaplan?
Here.
Rothschild?
Here.
Okay. And Committee Member Guerrero is excused. Committee Member Bell is absent.
Okay.
Turn it on the side. On the side, turn it on.
On the side.
Yes.
Red means off.
Okay, we'll proceed with public comments for items not listed. For items listed and not listed on the agenda, a 3-minute limitation shall apply to each member of the public who wishes to address the General Plan Advisory Committee on any items. And I have one speaker, Robert Lee. Is it Robert Lee Sneed? The third.
Hello, good evening. My name is Robert Lee Sneed. I'm a member of the Southwest Regional Council of Carpenters. I happen to live in the local area, 3739 North Golden Avenue, San Bernardino, California. And I recreate in the vicinity of the project. Believe that I will be impacted by the environment impacts of the project. The city should require the project to build utilizing a local and skilled and trained workforce. Local hiring and skilled and trained workforce requirements reduce construction-related environment impacts while benefiting the local economy. In recent 2020 report titled Putting California on the High Road, a Jobs and Climate Action Plan for 2030, the California Workforce Development Board concluded that investments in growing diversity and upskilling California workforce can positively affect returns on climate migration efforts. Moreover, just this year, the South Coast Air Quality Management District found that the use of local state certified apprenticeship programs or a skilled trained workforce with a local hire component can result in air pollution reductions. Other cities have not hesitated to apply skilled and trained workforce requirements for private development projects in their cities. Recently, the city of Hayward in Northern California adopted skilled and trained workforce requirements in its general plan and municipal code. Local skilled and trained workforce requirements can boost economy development and migrate transportation and greenhouse gas impacts by minimizing vehicle miles traveled. And that's what I have to say for today. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Sneed. Well, today's meeting is a continuation from the last meeting that we had on land use. And last meeting we covered the first ward. And we're hoping to cover the second and the third and the fourth ward this time. And so that's why we have a short agenda. So let's begin by our consultant and city staff introductions.
Yes, good evening, committee members, and welcome for our next round of review of the land use maps. I have Stephanie here with me to help us record the meeting, and we have Woody Tesher who's going to lead us through the exercise. Woody, please.
Thank you, Oliver, and Chair and members of the committee once again. So we're going to pick up tonight where we left off last time with the maps. We'll ask you to, as we did last time, gather around the maps on the table. Again, we'll be using reference materials that we had last time. Remember, we had tables that basically summarized for you information regarding the location, what the current zoning was, the input we'll receive from the public, and again, some preliminary recommendations for your consideration as well. There are a number of sub-areas, or at least one here tonight, that overlaps with an area that you discussed at your last meeting, given that the ward boundaries divide some of the areas that we're looking at. So tonight, for example, Baseline you had addressed at your last meeting, and again, we still want your input to basically say what happens on the other side of the street should happen on this side of the street as well, for a greater consistency as well. So we'll walk through that. We only were successful in getting through one, but this was our first discussion last time, so hopefully we know the routine by this point in time of going through. If we don't accomplish all 4 wards, we can indeed extend to, we want to make sure that you're comfortable with your recommendations on each of these locations themselves. I will indicate we'll use the same format. We'll have the computer projections, which you also have printed in your document, of the various sub-areas highlighted within this document. And again, those of you who, I know Joel looked at, a committee member, Rothschild looked and had requested last time the access to ArcBase information in terms of accessing the delineation of the boundaries and the sub-areas. If you've not been able to take a look at that, I believe Stephanie sent out the link to that to everybody, and hopefully it's pretty useful for you.
That was enormously helpful, so thank you.
Great. So with that, I'm going to walk over here, as we did, and ask you to walk over here and join me. So again, as we did last time, we have the map showing each of the various sub-areas that we have been looking at. We also again have, for anybody's reference, some of the copy of the imagery that was related to the various land use categories that were considered by the public, et cetera, during their community workshops, as well as considered for the online exercises that the people who again provided input only on using online information. Again, just to remember what we have on the maps. In the black text, the ideas that were generated through the public information. We also have basically also in blue what the current zoning is for those areas. And then we have some areas circled based upon conversation as well that I will highlight here in a moment. So I'm going to start with an area that we had covered last time. We move to our maps up here. It's really the second area identified up here, because this is an area that you did discuss at your last meeting. Baseline, basically, as you know, is a mix of commercial, some vacant parcels, some properties that are open today and vacant. The community's ideas is, just to summarize again what was on the chart, that we're looking at mixed use within this area. Looking at more pedestrian-oriented commercial within this area. The commercial becomes more pedestrian-oriented, walkable from surrounding neighborhoods, et cetera. Residential of various densities, from various categories and densities of residential, mixing use as well. Your recommendation, just to remind you, when we considered the south side of the street, was for a mixed-use category within this area. And again, to remind you, when we talked about mixed use, we indicated that the parcels with such a designation could accommodate a 100% commercial building, 100% residential building, or vertical buildings where housing is located above. We also, if you remember our discussion, indicated also there would be a policy to cluster ground level, require ground level commercial to be clustered near the intersections as well, to make that permissive on the ground floor in other areas, but to cluster it in those areas. So staff would like you to consider basically the same recommendation for the north side of the street. We also looked at the ability to, remember, we differentiated mixed-use corridor, which were the linear areas along the street. We also have a site here that basically has some depth. that you may want to consider as a mixed-use center, where we talked about the differentiating that, the mixed-use center. You could have some potential horizontal or commercial maybe up front with residential to the rear, et cetera, so you can spread things out horizontally on the site. So your thoughts about the north side of Baseline?
The north side of Baseline would be here, correct?
We're going to come up here, up to these streets a little bit later. But we're just right here. It's the areas along the frontage here within the boundary.
And what street is this?
Baseline.
And East Street, right in the middle?
D is here,
D.
E is here,
Okay.
And Waterman.
Waterman is here. And it's own commercial today, I should have said that,
Yeah.
which doesn't allow any housing.
Probably stay commercial.
I see commercial on top housing.
Yeah, I say mixed use, the same as the
Right.
southern half of Baseline.
You probably don't want the south side of the street to have a
I don't.
different designation than the north side of the street.
Well, I mean, if you're going to transition, but I don't, Baseline's a major thoroughfare and major commerce, and it's unlikely to change, so.
The designation would have 100% would be developed for commercial, but it also basically says you're going to have the opportunity to have housing in addition to the commercial, if you want it.
I'm just curious, Baseline runs for miles, both
Right.
east and west. I mean, when you go west into Rancho Cucamonga, I mean, do you have mixed use there? I've never seen it.
No.
No,
I've never seen it.
it's 100% commercial.
It's all 100% commercial. Right.
But it's also, their commercial lots are huge. So they're able to do
They
very
have to-
large commercial, as opposed to just street side commercial, which is what we can do on Baseline.
Maybe small lots here.
They're all small lots.
Well, you
with
back
exception
right,
of-
you back right up against the housing,
Yeah.
existing housing. So you can't really put in a Home Depot or a large shopping center.
And as we indicated, the other constraint is because of the parcel size and the depth, is providing parking.
Yeah.
And code required parking, so you're real limited.
What would happen then to the commercial center? Isn't it on Baseline that used to house the Smart and Final and another market and?
That's over at Sierra Way, Sierra and,
No, not Sierra Way. It's
or the Smart and Final?
at Smart and Final, it's on
thought that
this
was
side
on
of the
Sierra.
East Street.
It's small miles of division. What is it?
I thought it was on Ninth
What would
Street.
happen?
Isn't it Ninth Street?
It's
I think it's
between East Street
Okay.
It's just
And-
east of East Street.
and
And
yeah,
north
west
of-
of East Street.
North of Ninth?
East and like Arrowhead, maybe, like right in.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right
yeah,
there.
yeah, you're right.
It's
Sorry,
a
you're
large
right.
North side of the
commercial,
street, yeah.
North of the pawn shop.
where the Smart and Final, the grocery market,
Oh,
the
yeah,
other
that's right,
stores.
that's right.
Right.
What would that happen?
Where, let me just be clear where that is.
That
On the map.
large vacant commercial building that has that large lot in front of it.
Where on the map?
Huge lot.
It's going to be,
Right.
It's
It's the northwest corner of Arrowhead and Baseline.
Arrowhead and Baseline.
That's right.
This
This one right here.
That's big. So the building is along the back here. And there's a huge sea of vacant parking lot in the middle.
So
And I
this-
think the people who came to the forums where there were residents in the second ward were talking about that in reference to the food desert, and they wanted to see a grocery store or a supermarket or something that was
Which would be,
big and so
yeah,
forth.
which would be
centrally
a
located
commercial, I would suggest to do that, because we can't identify a site for a supermarket. You can't be that discreet in terms of the uses. But I think that would be an appropriate opportunity to basically create, again, extend, if this entire square, I don't know why this shows it as being public facility. Is there some public facility there?
It's a
It's a school. It's a school, that's a school, then that's not where the Smart and Final is.
yeah.
So where are we? I don't want to designate a school for commercial use.
It is east
trying to
of
get the-
East Street.
Go this way?
Is Steel Brothers site? Steel Brothers site?
So that's the old,
And Waterman.
That's Waterman.
yeah, that's Cedar Brothers.
I mean,
Oh, water,
Yeah,
yeah,
This way,
yes.
this way.
It's down south.
There's a pretty market here.
That's Baseline.
It's this area here,
I
that's
mean, yeah, there's
Lincoln.
pretty a market here.
This one right here?
It's on this side here.
Okay, so that's a site, so basically, With a mixed-use designation, you could, as I said, be 100% commercial. So I think we're going to want to have certain policies about things like grocery stores and neighborhood serving uses as well. But again, remind you that when we talked about the policies for the area previously, we indicated that with the designation of mixed use that allows 100% commercial or these other uses, there would be a policy to encourage the development of neighborhood serving commercial uses, which a grocery store would be among those
But
categories.
there was no problem with the mixed use. They seem to like the idea of the mixed use as a place to walk.
Exactly.
Take the family, do a little shopping for 1, 2, 3, and
Exactly.
but that the big anchor store was
Right.
a supermarket.
Yeah, and I think there was a photograph of something like that in here.
So what would be the practicality of using that, I think was a village designation?
Well, you're looking at, okay, so we talked about the
Yeah.
village area. I think what we're talking about, I'm just going to use red, is to basically have and I'll refer to it as a village idea, concept, but it would be mixed use.
Right.
And so this would be basically a center designation. I think that would be a center designation as well.
Right, right.
And I see where she's talking about that some of the residents do want a walkable area, and, shopping. But then again, let me ask you this. Do we have enough location to actually diminish the idea of a mixed use there and put it somewhere else for residential? Does it have to be in this area, or?
Well, I think the notion, well, again, all this does is create a designation that allows a developer to come in to make a recommendation.
Okay.
So it doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen on that site, but it says this creates capacity for a developer in this case who may want to come and say, I want to grow a grocery store, et cetera. And then there'll be policies in the plan that these centers in particular that are intended to serve the neighborhoods would be pedestrian-oriented and accessible from the neighborhoods, et cetera, to indeed to create that capability.
Well, isn't that area already that? Where that used to be?
It's pretty auto-oriented today.
Yeah, but Smart and Final was there till they.
Yeah, exactly.
Till they couldn't.
Yeah, that was a single destination. It's the idea of mixed uses. You create a clustering of uses that are going to draw together. So you may park once and you go to multiple uses along the area.
And then this is a perfect opportunity for the locals to hang out.
So again, the notion, again.
Opposed to the downtown area,
Right.
which is going to attract more tourism. And this area here, Baseline, which is known for, I don't know, decades. It's now, I don't know what you want to call it, but it should be revamped and possibly into a little village for the locals.
Yep.
With mixed use.
That's the idea, was to cluster those at the intersection of your major parcels. And then in between, it could be, again, all commercial, it could be 100% residential, or it could be vertical.
Okay.
Any of those. And again, I think the other things we said, there'd be a policy accompanied that would basically emphasize the attraction of neighborhood serving and linking those uses to really serve the neighborhood, that people can come to these
Could you
areas.
create little promenades for these residents to cross into these, like we have here downtown, for promenade ways?
That's a public works improvement that we're probably not getting into that kind of detail in the plan. Understand. So are we okay with this idea of the mixed use, the more village, pedestrian-oriented at the intersections? Anyone have questions about or issues with that?
And that's on both sides of the street.
That'd be on both sides of
On
the
both
street.
sides, right.
Because that's where you want to cluster them at there.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm just writing a note here about the village orientation.
I can see that.
Head.
Because there's lots of residents that don't
We
want
have a
to go to the
high-density
downtown area.
project go all the
They
way
to
here, don't we?
local.
And the high-density housing?
Oliver, I need your,
Waterman and,
Oliver,
and Basin.
or Harold, need your input.
We had that high-density housing
Right
right here, that's being built right here.
Like the line, what do you see?
Right here on Baseline and Waterman.
Southeast corner.
Huge high-density housing project right here, right?
Oh, that's
Yeah,
the,
he's talking about the old Waterman Garden.
Bottom Gardens, yes.
Yeah.
That's already done. We're not done.
Well, no, it's not
Planned
done, no,
for.
it's.
Planned for.
It's being built though. also.
Yes.
I mean, here you have a bunch of high-density housing here, so.
So, yeah, so again, you'll be serving, you can serve with the housing and have, again, that walkability across the street and serve those residents. Makes good sense.
And here, here it's small, but I mean, to go from, there's a lot of housing right in here, which is why this place here. If they were to come over here, this is way too far. It's on the other side of Waterman.
So again, I think that's a notion. Traditionally we built these corridors and they acted like knives to separate neighborhoods. So you think about using the corridors to be healing. You use cliche here to bring people back into those corridors.
Sort of like New York.
Or part of New York.
Okay, let's move up to Highland. And Highland, there's a little bit difference. Again, there's probably a tighter concentration, if you will, of denser concentration of commercial uses up there today. And I'm going to talk about this area of Highland right first, and then we'll talk about this one separately here as well. So we're talking about the area that shows up there to the west, as well as we'll be dealing with this area in another ward later. But the notion in here, again, was mixed use, so allowing housing in. It's zone commercial today. Again, if you look at what people recommended, pedestrian-oriented commercial, mixed use, commercial office, residential high, residential medium high, et cetera, within the area, what was how recommended. What suggested for the committee's consideration is, again, a mixed-use designation with one difference. And the other is we talked about promoting and requiring commercial on the ground floor at the intersections, et cetera. The notion here is we do have an area between Waterman and basically D or E Street that's by the nature of the commercial uses today was to require commercial on the ground floor all the way, but on that particular segment. So it have a mixed use, which would allow housing, but ground floor, not just clustered in the intersection, but between these 2 points, the entirety of the ground floor will be required to be commercial use. Again, reinforces what's there today.
So my only question about that is parking. Especially because when most of that was developed, parking standards were mostly non-existent.
Radically non-existent.
So now when you start looking at, ADA spaces and other things, how's somebody going to operate a business there? But there's virtually no parking.
Yeah.
Or live.
This is an
Well,
area.
and living is even worse if you start putting residences above.
Right.
Where do you put all the cars?
This is an area that, compared to what we were just looking at on baseline, you notice that there are a fair number of deeper parcels within this area as well. So you begin to think about projects that could physically on-site accommodate housing. So if you have, let's say, 3-level mixed-use building, ground-level commercial, you tuck in the parking below or to the right.
Sort of thing.
Yeah. It's physically feasible to do, again, because of we've got some depth of parcels here that you just don't have down on baseline.
It's true, there's no parking there either on baseline, except for that one here. On Highland, the people tended to park in the back and smaller lots because there were smaller businesses and so forth.
All you have to do is put one unit above a business and you're done.
Yeah, but the real question is where's all the parking?
Well, in reality,
Street.
Financially, you're going to need at least 2.
Yeah, I got this.
And generally, there are. I can show you some. Actually, there's this one right here. Is that? Photograph right here. This one. Okay. This is again 2 levels, etc. This has full ground level. This is probably about the same depth of parcel that is. And the parking here is tucked in behind to the rear. So the units actually project over like a parking deck, and then there's one below grade.
Okay.
And where would the people who are coming to make business, just only business?
They're part of the parking is dedicated for customer spaces, yes.
So that would be elevated parking?
This project, what it is, this project, if you take, I wish, draw here. What it's like is on the street frontage, you have, let's say here's the parcel, and here's the building. It's got vertical setbacks, so you've got 3 levels of buildings. So this is the front with the commercial, the deck, etc. So this is the commercial space, but what they do then is to the back, and the residents go back here. So you have the commercial parking here, and then you have a below-grade parking for the residents. So the parking is separated between the commercial and the residential.
what you're doing by doing it's a great idea, but now you've increased development costs astronomical. As soon as you go,
subterranean, yeah.
I mean, as soon as you put elevated parking and
Yeah.
below grade, now
You,
it's
you
just...
could, you could still vertically do this vertically too, which is less, it's half the cost.
Would the sidewalks increase? Would they stay the same?
Well, the sidewalks, it depends on what we do for the street cross-section, because the sidewalks, indeed, if you notice what they did here, actually, keep coming back to this, here's the sidewalk, but there is this sort of series of back and forth cutouts, et cetera. So it depends on what kind of the setbacks would be. You normally would require, because if you're going to have ground floor uses, you're probably going to want some space for outdoor dining, especially now, et cetera. So you design the frontage to sort of modulate back and forth in and out.
Or you build a structure, I mean, it's in your sidewalk.
Well, that's the other thing. Thank you.
You could do that.
Put words in my mouth.
Downtown.
In our mobility section of the plan, we're going to be looking at the concept of shared parking facilities. And indeed, it may be a structure, it may be, there are different ways of accomplishing it. We don't want to worry about parking tonight, et cetera, because that's a whole different topic about how we provide parking.
It sort of is, but it also sort of has to do with, where,
Everything is going.
how you're going to zone it. And it sort of comes to the question, and I don't want to head down the rabbit hole, but we have a lot of houses in the city that are going to have a difficult time accommodating electric charging capabilities.
Oh, yeah.
Because they park on the street. I mean, they have no on-property parking. And I'm curious at what point in our process do we look at things like community parking, charging facilities to handle some of these older residents that, a facility in the neighborhood, and it'd be great if it supported business like you go to a restaurant, park your car there, charge it while you eat and shop and do all those sorts of things, and then go back to your house where you can't accommodate charging. So I just don't know at what point we talk about those sorts of things.
When we get into the mobility element, because we're covering parking as well.
Okay.
And then we're also, there is also a section of sort of permeating throughout all the plan, going to be appropriate kinds of policies and strategies to address climate change. And obviously climate change, one of the objectives is to move more towards electric vehicles, and probably going to be in that position not too far from now.
Well, we've got a legislative mandate. So.
Exactly. And so, yes, the answer is that is indeed going to be an important part of the discussion.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do any of these words have any lots or location for like farming? There's none, is there?
Are you talking about more like urban farms, those kinds of things?
Right.
That would be an overlay policy. I mean, in theory, you could do that. We'll be looking at in our general policy as to where you want to allow those. You're not going to create a zone for that, but you would basically create a policy of when you would have what you might call neighborhood farms or those kinds of urban farms. So are we okay with the basic concept?
Maybe not a farm, but a garden? Instead of a farm, a garden?
Yeah.
Within a park or something like that?
Yeah. You're probably going to want to do that on some of these other less intensive streets in terms of the cars. But there's some good examples. I drive on a street over to the Hollywood Bowl that's Highland, which is heavily trafficked, and there's a great community garden right off of the street. I'm driving to Hollywood Bowl, jump out and get some food and take it to the Hollywood Bowl kind of thing. Anyway, so I think we agree that the notion of requiring commercial for this intent, the opportunity of mixed use, and then obviously coupled with parking as we get through that as well. Okay.
When we go, what are we going to go to? Aesthetics, obviously design, that's way down the road, right?
Yeah, we're going to have some basic general design. We're not doing a design standards, obviously, but we'll have some basic general, what I call urban design principles. So, for example, the other thing that you want back here, again, is you don't want blank walls along the street front.
Oh, absolutely not.
You're going to want to see a physical transparency back and forth. We'll put some general direction about that into the plan.
Right. What also softens the baseline along, right down by Rancho Cucamonga, is the landscape medium.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of softening on that side where it beautifies the street itself.
There will be street cross-sections also prepared for this. They've been doing
Center
it
dividers.
for the downtown area.
Decorative center dividers.
It's not,
Exactly. Pedestrian friendly.
landscape, walk.
Exactly, right.
So, let's move on to our next areas. We're going to look at D and E. I may have reversed those. D and E streets. And again, these were streets on E. They're both designated for commercial. The E street is called out for, D is called out for commercial office specifically. So there's an emphasis upon office development within this area under the current zoning. Again, looking at these streets, just as we had done before, these are streets like Mount Vernon, some of the others, a lot of vacant parcels, very shallow parcels along the length as well. So the ideas that were generated here was, again, from the community. We heard about commercial, we heard about neighborhood commercial, we heard about residential within this area as well. So again, sort of this notion of allowing housing and commercial uses within the area, emphasis upon neighborhood serving uses, and the notion here, there were a couple of places where recommendation came out to require commercial on E Street between 21st and Highland and Baseline. So basically, you see these sort of blips here? This one was these little bubbles. Is at the north and south end that would require commercial to be closer to those streets on the ground level. Even so, if it's a mixed-use building vertically, you would require commercial on the ground floor, or it could be 100% commercial. So the notion was you want to concentrate, in these cases, commercial in those two locations, trending in an exact boundary, but moving into those directions would be part of the policy recommendation.
This is all residential.
What was the rationale for that?
The rationale was to, city staff, help me on this one, was to basically load up again. The notion, as we said earlier, was to concentrate your commercial at the intersections in any mixed use. So the notion was that it works three-dimensionally. So vertically and horizontally, so you're beginning to load up at the intersection those times of ground level and then build lesser density between those.
Well, what do you think the depth, from here's your street?
Yes.
What are the depths of these lines?
Very shallow.
Yeah.
Some of them are 80 feet, I believe, and maybe even less.
They're basically residential size lots.
There again, with
100
parking.
feet probably 100 foot average.
Yeah.
And then we've got, we have to provide so many parking spaces and all
Right.
that.
They can consolidate and maybe utilize some of the.
So one thing to keep in mind, it's easy to throw out the concept of mixed use. We want mixed use everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Essentially, that's what I'm hearing. Ward by ward, and we were just talking about this. This ward by itself is probably a majority of the cities in LA County in terms of size, geographic area, right? So if we were looking at this was the city of whatever, city of Second Ward, right? Okay, we would be looking, okay, this is what we want in our city just right here. What happens is we've got 7 different cities, right? And so everyone wants theirs, right? Everyone wants their core. Everyone wants their mixed-use corridor. And so that's why we hear this repetitively in all the wards. We hear this, which is, so everyone's on the same page, that's one. But like, as you're pointing out, there's a reality to it. Not only are they shallow, they're narrow.
Yeah.
So I come in here on Baseline, I buy one piece of property, and it's 75 feet wide, 100 feet deep. What am I going to do? Not a whole lot,
Combine it.
right? The neighbor on both sides of me, either side of me is not going to want to sell to me. And so what happens is, for it to really work, it's assemblage.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, okay, if I buy 1, 2 properties that are side by side, it's not even going to be worth my while or investment. But if I buy 5, 8, or 10, now I could do something. And so we're talking about parking requirements, development standards in general. Usually that's what developers look for when they want to reduce costs. Parking spaces cost a lot of money. I don't know what it is. I think in subterranean parking, I think it's what, like 80,000 per space?
Subterranean is running about 50 to 60 now. For concrete.
So I mean, when you start doing the math, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then they say, well, just go up.
Yeah.
Well, you can only go up so far before that starts, creating things. So what we don't want to do is have our expectations to a point where we're going to recreate all of Bayside and Highland because we're going to have mixed use everywhere. They're all going to look like this, and
Knock it all down.
what's going to happen is these large underutilized properties that we have are going to stay there in 2050.
Sure.
The next group that's in here doing the same exercise,
And then
what happened?
getting,
What were these guys thinking back there in 2020?
and then getting every parcel together, because they're all privately owned.
So what you start doing is when we start looking at implementation and programs, and this is where the Planning Commission comes in, is what kind of incentives are there? A lot of times it's like, well, okay, can we reduce the parking because we're next to transit? Can we? Can we? And so that's because if we're spending here, we got to save it somewhere else. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. If it was going to happen, it would have already happened by now.
I was just curious, but I think when you step back and look at it, East Street's clearly a major north-south corridor. It ties right into downtown, so it's a good way for downtown to grow north as it, hopefully as downtown fills up.
Right.
It provides a great corridor for north-south mass transit, for connecting different. So I think commercial's great for that area, despite those limitations.
So are we comfortable, again, let me just remind you what the recommendation, or the consideration, I wouldn't say recommendation, the consideration was for your consideration, was, again, a mixed use, though, but requiring clustering of commercial towards the intersection on the ground level. Between it might be 100% residential. There are places, I can show you in Long Beach, for instance, North Long Beach, which is the lower income area of Long Beach, where they've taken areas like this and put two-story townhouses all the way along there that fit in very nicely into the corridor.
Exactly. And so, you can call it a mixed-use corridor, just in general, from here to say, we want this mixed use. But that doesn't mean that every property has to be mixed use.
Well, that's right. Well, again, the
And so
notion, as we've said, is the definition will say it can be 100% residential, it can be 100% commercial, except at the corners. At the corners.
And then there's the policy part. It's like, well, okay, the goal is in the policy, you want to focus on the corners. Maybe there's a criteria on minimum lot size or assemblage and those kinds of things. Like, okay, you put together some properties. Now we're talking about something, and so then that creates the incentive for the developer or investor to come in and say, well, that makes sense.
One of the things you're going to want to think about in the incentives, it's a dilemma we're facing right now, is the issue of displacement of the businesses that are the local serving, I use the term ethnic, lower income oriented types of businesses, and you want to create incentives, but at the same time you don't want to purposely create values that force them out. So that's a tough dilemma. There are institutes at UCLA and Berkeley right now who are focusing on that, on the anti-displacement issues as well. We'll be talking more about that later because it's a policy issue that we'll be discussing. But we want to be mindful of, we talked about Mount Vernon in the past too, which has very much a character based upon a population that surrounds it, et cetera. That's more of a potential festival area, if you will, for the community to gather in places. But those are conversations we will have in the future.
So if you keep in mind, for some of you that have been here a while, and you've seen things change or not change, maybe there's some reasoning behind that. And that's where your input is valuable. It's like, and I remember driving by when I was a kid. It was like that before.
And there's another issue is the developers who are developing these kinds of things in lower income communities, because I can show you lots of places where it's been developed. You don't have, I don't want to be pejorative about this, but you don't have that cachet to attract those kind of developers right now. And that's why having other things happening in the city may be very important to create that cachet that makes developers want to come to San Bernardino. We're talking about downtown, for example, as being an anchor. There's some other sort of interesting, we'll be talking about the stadium entertainment district later, because it's one of our sub-areas. But again, if you create enough reason for people to come and want to invest in San Bernardino, that's what you want to do. You want to give people a reason to come here, and then something can happen.
Well, the synergy would be for the downtown for that to happen though, right?
Yes.
That's the.
Well, you need to create an
that's the trigger
overall,
for it?
and it spreads.
Does that understand?
It spreads. I mean, I grew up in Pasadena, where the west side of Pasadena was derelict. I mean, there were porno stores in the west side of Fair Oaks Avenue, where old Pasadena is now, with restaurants and shops and boutiques and all this good, exciting stuff. But it took years for that to change. Again, my parents would never let me in that part of town.
Pasadena, 3rd Street in Santa Monica, you had the
Downtown LA?
you had the area around the Queen Mary, for those of us that remember the Pike.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was
So,
a kid when the Pike was around, but no.
Oliver, let me ask one last question on East Street, and then I'll kind of be quiet. Because, back when I first got here, everything was centered on Highland Avenue, then it swung down to Inland Center. But I mean, that's all along East Street. How is there a concept of how East Street's going to transition from North San Bernardino all the way down to the south, so that it's going to look seamless and it's going to look coherent and, as a part of that overall plan? I mean, because right now we're looking at little tiny segments. And I'm trying to step back and look at the big picture of East Street end to end.
Well, if you notice, how many different colors are on that corridor?
Yeah.
So each color represents a different land use, different type of development.
Right.
And so that's why you have the hopscotch of this, that, and the other. And so when we start looking to make it more uniform in color and in policy or development type that we're looking for, then that's when you start to stabilize with that.
You also need to realize that even in the most successful places, you're limited by the linear length, which you can cluster pedestrian activity. 3rd Street Promenade, having been there from the beginning, was only successful for 2 blocks for about 5 years.
Yeah.
And the northern block between up to Wilshire was dead, et cetera. And this is in a very high-income community. It takes time to convert and convert. And we had pressure working with the city to bend, if you will, 3rd Street east along some of the cross streets, Arizona, Santa Monica. Wilshire was probably its own thing, et cetera. And basically, all the economists said, don't do that, because you're never going to be able to create the same kind of intensity of activity and destination there. But another solution to begin to be thinking about is how we deal with streetscapes. Can we create some kind of visual continuity, et cetera? We need desperately to add street trees. I mean, the whole urban heat island is a big deal these days. It's going to be bigger, going to be much bigger. And so, you begin to think about, well, if it's not those buildings like that along the frontage in the entire area, do we at least create a character and a quality of that area where the intervening space, and I can show you some places in downtown San Diego, which has the commercial clustered, and then you go 2 blocks north of Little Italy, and you've got the residential clustered along the street, but they have continuous streetscape all the way along that creates this great character to the area.
No, I'm just, I'm not necessarily saying, I did say look and feel, but more of just sort of a focus on it. The far north end, you got residential, and the far south end, I'm not sure what's going to happen down in, Southeast Street. You have downtown in the middle of that. Just sort of, how does it all connect to each other from, little discrete neighborhoods that connect to each other, hopefully?
Yes. Yeah, and there's a community investment also.
Right.
We have our capital improvements programs. It's not just limited to streets. You could do sidewalks, street trees, and those kinds of things. And so, and this is, becomes a policy document. And the goal is to have a general plan that the city really uses. Where it's like, well, okay, let's look at our CIP, and let's, every year or every 2 years or whatever, let's pick a corridor. And maybe next year it's East Street from Baseline to Highland. And you know what, we're going to spend whatever that is to redo the sidewalks, put some street trees, and now have a walkable, kind of area, and then those that you know, it's kind of like, you know, the neighbors want to keep up, then the shop owners and the property owners say, well, okay, now I gotta do something because I don't want the embarrassing property on the.
This is also the frustration of treating and dividing this exercise into wards. Because if you remember last week, or whatever our last meeting was, remember we talked about the fact that the downtown plan DE is looking at indeed an intensification of use north of the mall, et cetera, area out of the public area, and to create some kind of density in this area. And then you, not you personally, the team here recommended taking this area right here and beginning also to intensify, but not to the same extent as what you're doing down here. So what you're doing is creating this movement along this corridor to the north, and by these kind of opportunities that create that opportunity there, you're connecting.
I just want to make sure we're not making these decisions looking through a soda straw, that's all.
Yeah,
That's really what I'm.
Well, that's our last meeting, once we get through these individuals, is piecing them all together, basically, to show that there's coherence, if you will, because you may want to go back and say, oh, this, when it's adjacent to this, maybe I need to rethink that.
Sure.
So that's the nature of
And
it.
the exercise is, this is what we're working towards. It's a fluid conversation. You know, you know, it was unveiled, you know, at the last meeting we looked at the first ward, and now we've spent a good hour on, you know, on the second ward, not just on the ward specific, but concepts.
Right.
You know, last half hour we've been talking about just concepts, and so now when we move into the third and the other wards, now it's like, okay, we're building on that knowledge base kind of a thing.
Once you go north of Highland on East Street, that's pretty much all residential until you get up to 30th.
Yeah. And that'll be a different conversation. Down here, it's all yellow, residential, you know, so now.
And you can't really change the zoning. That's already
that's not really going to
Well, and
residential.
Given the whole residential issue, you don't want to lose residential these days.
But this is all little small businesses, all little small parcels owned individually. We can't use eminent domain on that, can we?
No. But again, that's what are the other incentives to create the change, and what are the inducements to actually create it as well. And again, we have this section of the plan called economic development, and we'll be focusing on those kinds of things once we get to the economic development section, which will follow land use as well in terms of the policies and goals. So let me move to, we've covered these areas up here. Again, I didn't focus on this area just to the east end of Highland, but we know we have deeper parcels there today. You have some larger developments within the area today. All of this was being basically recommended for a mixed-use center that would allow commercial and residential, but again, require commercial along the street frontage because you've got an intensity of activity within this area as well.
So if you look at these lots, you know, now they're larger. You see this?
Yeah.
You know, those are large lots now. You know, that's a lot different than here, or these here. So now, this can become more of a more commercial core.
Well, this is like 3 major restaurants that are abandoned.
Exactly. It's more, it is a larger, this is not a neighborhood center. I mean, it's a more of a, if you categorize it regional, community, neighborhood, I hate to do these kind of cliche differentiations, but it attracts it's a larger concentration of commercial activity. But you still would want it to be more pedestrian oriented, ultimately, I would think, in terms of ultimate kind of infill development, what you could do. Okay. Let's move, next area, so we covered these areas, let's move over to Waterman, right here. So again, some deeper parcels, so again, it's a little mix.
Waterman and Woodbury.
Again, between baseline and between Highland and baseline. And again, remember we have this commercial center here at the south end, sort of anchoring it. There is some residential, you know, several parcels that have residential in here today. Again, some small, very shallow, extremely shallow vacant properties in here, et cetera. You have towards the north today, with the hospital here, you have some concentration of you know, smaller office buildings, if you will, for medical facilities, et cetera. Buildings have been reused for those, and sort of, I've circled it here in this area as well. And then it changes out as you move to the south. Again, in terms of what we heard from the community, again, sorry, Ben, Oliver, mixed-use corridor, again, some more commercial neighborhood, but with an emphasis upon medical office, again, to this northern area, capital, and creating basically the thoughts of a medical-related district, if you will.
Aren't some of those closing already?
Yeah, they are.
They're closing medical offices, so very
Yeah, but
closing,
I think a lot of that's because a lot of those were old converted residentials, and they're just not suitable. I mean, the structure's not suitable for them.
In other words, it's a conversion from an older, it was never designed for that purpose, and therefore it is not. This would not preclude again, by the mixed-use designation, it would allow other things to happen. But again, just saying from a policy standpoint, this would be the area where you want to try to concentrate medical-related uses to the extent you can, because this is a major anchor, if you will.
Where's the hospital?
Right there.
Okay.
Right there. Right there.
Oh, right there.
Yeah.
Right there.
So your thoughts? That make sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, our next area, we have some of these are the areas that we refer to as centers. This is the area Highland and Sterling, so we're over here. We were back here and in this area. And I think basically, again, this is zone commercial today. This area in particular, we have some fairly large-scale commercial today. We didn't see real significant opportunity to change any of this into residential and mixed use, having more of that to the west in terms of keeping the activity and concentrating the commercial in the area. So the notion was zone commercial today. Basically what we did have in terms of the recommendations from the public was commercial, some very high density, well that's right here, that's already high density residential in terms of the zoning. Right now you will see where the zoning designations are. So this is residential today, this is residential today. Basically the thought was to keep what the designations are today.
I think just going through all that, a lot, especially this area, on their own, they're upgrading a new restaurant, I mean, all on their own without being
this is just creating the capacity for basically a developer coming and says, I want to renovate. What are your standards say? We're saying, yeah, commercial use, renovate, go for it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd rather see like mixed-use center or a pedestrian-oriented center.
Okay.
Because
in this area?
Yeah, because there is a lot of commercial there. I think a lot of it's underutilized, and a lot of those businesses are not. It's not up to par. It's just they're not future forward-looking businesses. Things like fitness center. I think fitness centers there, and some of the old,
so you might allow something like
old bowling alleys there, which have been converted into offices, but it's not making good use of the real estate. I'd much rather see a.
Here's a classical example of that, because you have the grocery store anchor, you have Trader Joe's over here, housing on top of Trader Joe's, you have a restaurant over here, which you can't see in the photograph, and you have the street frontage where the buildings are pedestrian oriented.
And again, it's at the intersection of two major streets, which provides for the potential for some good public transit. I think that kind of makes sense.
So keep it as a commercial.
Well,
No.
You're saying a mixed-use center.
A mixed-use center. Because you have the space to make that kind of a development there, potentially.
Others?
I think that sounds good. Because there is some abandonment there. We're not really going anywhere.
So
Well,
we have that here, so we're basically saying do this here as well.
Yeah, and I don't think having these large shopping centers with big parking lots and a few buildings stretched around the edges is really kind of. I don't think it does a lot for the city.
Is this a highway?
That's the freeway. That's 210.
That's the third.
So everybody comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's move on to this area at the west. I'm trying to remember exactly where this is on our map. It's this area right over here. At the west end of Highland, this is an area that is zoned commercial today. This portion is zoned commercial. This is sort of an entry to the city. You have, of course, you have the 215, you have the access to the north, you have basically, if you will, larger parcels except on the north side of the street in this area. And we're really only looking at this particular area. And what we heard on that in terms of the input from the public was keep the designations, make it commercial and industrial just as a designation, no reason to change it. But also seeing that this would be a good entry to the city in terms of ultimately how it's treated, that there's some kind of signal that you're coming in, that this wasn't the best location because of also adjacency to the freeway for a lot of housing.
Maybe like the highway-oriented commercial? That kind of.
Where's the Home Depot here?
It's not, that's over on the 21st area, that side, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, this area for the freeway is vicious. You don't want to get near there.
Yeah, well, you got the noise issue, the noise contour maps, which we've got in the background report. This area is one of the more impacted areas of the city in terms of noise. So we're okay with commercial? Yeah. Like this? Or commercial and industrial?
Industrial?
Yeah, this portion right here is zoned industrial.
Light industrial?
And there's a low intensity, yeah.
Light.
Light.
That's what? The blue, light industrial.
What's there now?
That where the car dealership used to be?
City staff?
Is that where the TAD is now?
Oliver,
Is that a dealership?
Travis.
Isn't that where the Chevy dealer is?
Yeah, Chevy dealer.
Yes. Right here.
And what is that other
Is this
blue?
industrial, is it Chevy?
Chevy dealer, and then yes.
What is that other blue?
Chevy sits right up here. This is like the kitchen place,
Yeah, yeah,
kitchen concept, something like that.
something like that.
Yeah, and then there's just a little bit of like industrial storage type things, and then the frontier yard.
Right, right.
And what is that other blue?
This over here,
Yes.
that is where the TAD office used to be.
That TAD office is now.
No, that's where it used to be. This is where it moved up to. This is the old one. It's kind of that big, like gray building that sits just kind of behind Jack in the Box and then the Stater Brothers.
This whole area needs to be built commercially, don't you think? I mean, with the Home Depot here?
Isn't it already commercial?
Well, you have industrial here also.
That's commercial in terms of the destination. So we're comfortable with the existing destinations. Okay, let me then go to our next area on the maps. We've got a lot of little pockets to get through, but I think some of these will go pretty quickly. Let me start with the area, I need this area. So we have the interchange area up here. We actually talked about where the building used to move to. Here's the 215, here's the 210. Basically, the zoning calls commercial office, and there's a small cutout in the northeast portion of it for residential medium. So the thought there from the committee is keep it as is. It should be commercial and residential medium.
Is this all homes, residential?
Those are all
here?
residential, single-family units.
If we keep it commercial, can we designate what kind of commercial? In other words, no junkyards.
We can create categories that limit the type. You know, that junkyards are more of a heavy and commercial kind of category. We can differentiate.
That's kind of.
I mean, we can't differentiate it to the point where we say only restaurants.
Way out.
Can't do that.
Way on the outskirts, huh?
Yeah, because we got too much of that going down the freeways that is coming into our city.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're okay with the designations, but I'm just going to put a note here.
No junkyards.
No junkyards, and we'll find out how we deal with that.
Well, it's commercial office, not
Right.
commercial.
It's, the southeast end is commercial. Let's just say industrial.
No, I don't think it's industrial up there.
It is commercial office, that's incorrect. It says zoning. Excuse me, I'm up here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's commercial office, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You're right. Read my own notes. Okay, the next area we'll move to in terms of the smaller nodes on here is the area Highland and the 215, that's the commercial, that's the one we already talked about, we're there. Del Rosa, now we are over here. And we're looking at the 2J area is this area of residential right here. It's a residential pocket. Today, there is a mix of different residential products within the area. Single family, some medium density kind of areas, et cetera. Your current zoning is residential medium within this area. There is a portion of so in that particular area. Your thoughts about whether, you know, that kind of mixed density residential still makes sense in that area? So by having a residential medium classification, designation there.
What is residential medium? How conceptually?
Medium was about, I believe, about 10, 12 units per acre maximum. So townhouse, two-story.
Sorry?
This area right here?
Under Rosa.
So it says here it's stated for mixed-use corridors?
That's a different area.
Oh.
That's 2J. We'll get up there.
Isn't this county pocket? Over here, it's county pocket.
It's over, yeah, that's county pocket right there, I believe. Gentlemen?
Yes.
Is this a county pocket, just for clarity? This area right here, east of the, or that's a city? Okay. Mm-hmm.
No, no, it's not. This, I know this all is over here. This color's not as washed out.
Yeah.
This is that, I know for a fact this is county. This
Right,
is, this is
that's what I thought.
brighter. So it's-
We did a color maybe existing land
Yeah.
uses for outside of the city, so I was sure that
It's not washed out enough.
yeah, it would be that. So we're okay with residential medium, continue the designations there today. You know, it's the character of what's there today that allows more of that to happen.
It is, I mean, yeah.
Within the area.
It is, I travel.
It's already there.
Okay, so this, okay, let me go to this area northeast up here. This is the 2J area on the map. It's here's Del Rosa. This is east of Del Rosa in this particular area here. You've got basically commercial along the frontage in terms of the designation, and then you have the rear portion of this is designated for residential medium. So these parcels here, you've got a mix of things back here. You've got some vacant parcels, you've got some apartments, and you've got some vacant parcels along the frontage as well. This is an area that we understand is, you know, difficult because of also, we'll talk about this area later. But the whole notion of this is, do you want to continue the commercial here? I mean, what are the options? In other words, if we don't do a commercial along the frontage, is that an area you change to residential?
Is the
Industrial?
casino somewhere around here?
So I think what I'm hearing is we stay pretty much as is.
Well, or, you know,
Is
like I
the
said, mixed
casino
use with
around
commercial.
No.
Not
over
yet,
there?
not yet. We're not there yet.
Yeah.
We'll just talk about this area in the future meeting.
I'd say mixed with commercial on the first floor, ground floor.
So a mixed-use corridor type
Yeah.
opportunity?
I mean, yeah.
I think I've been there maybe once or twice. I'm not too familiar with that. I just.
But then the rear
casino
portion
somewhere
being
around
the
there.
residential
Or above,
or above?
yeah.
So you basically is a mixed use along this entire Mr. Center?
Is it big enough to handle those?
Yeah, it's pretty good.
That is. That is, it's not the skinny parcels we have thus far.
more in favor of mixed use in that area.
So mixed use, I'll put down here an option, mixed use or residential. Okay. Moving along, we have these other parcels here. You will see a number of parcels that, these, again, the smaller fragmented parcels if you want. At the extreme east end of Highland, got the casino up there. Basically, this is an area that is called out for, right now it's commercial. The potential for commercial, or would you also want to see the potential for housing within this area?
On Highland, what would you want, housing? You think? What's that? Housing?
What is that, sir, called? Which street?
Highland, yeah.
Highland and Victoria. So casinos right here.
Casinos up there.
Isn't there some housing?
Yeah, some like apartments.
There's residential and apartments right over here.
And then this is all patent.
It's all patent.
You can see right off the freeway, no apartments. This shopping center over here, I believe it's closed also.
It is, it's all
Yeah,
fenced
it's
off.
all fenced out, yeah.
So, your thoughts in terms of use within that area?
This thing has failed a number of times, I mean.
Yeah, it hasn't done particularly well as commercial. I'd say mixed use.
Yeah, I think next year might be
Okay.
the opportunity.
I mean, at least until that area grows out.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. This area to the south is basically the public said we're just south of the freeway. So you have the Highland, you have the underpass of the freeway.
Right.
You have an area that's, there's a pending mixed-use project. Am I right or wrong in this area? The notes say pending mixed-use project, I just want to be clear. This area, we marked it C when we had our meeting with staff.
Isn't that a vacant lot right now?
Yes.
It's a vacant lot, two vacant lots. So what's that belong
Country
for?
site.
Yes.
Commercial? Commercial site, commercial development.
It's a commercial development site. It's a pending project.
Oh, okay, got it.
That's been
Which is what I
proposed
thought.
for about 3 dozen different things at various times. Is the land still available? It was locked up for a while.
It's vacant right now, it's a big empty lot, it's huge empty lot.
Yeah, it's the old
We have a proposal for it.
chimney closed. A lot of debate on the development was there. All those crappy apartments.
Arden Guthrie.
Arden Guthrie. That's what that is.
It was Home Depot.
114 4 foot.
That's where the Home Depot
That's why
was
there's
going to go
going
in.
to as well.
Yeah.
So,
But they-
The one down here?
Yeah, but they pulled out. Just a couple
Oh,
years
here?
ago. Well, this was only 4 or 5 years ago.
So the area to the south, west of there, again, is sort of mixed, single-family housing, vacant properties with scattered in there. It's about 30% vacant properties today. The community recommended residential high, existing zoning is medium-high within the area. Some thought was to allow for the infill with the same basic pattern of density of uses that are there today.
Because of the heavy concentration of crime there, we rezoned that commercial public facility back in the mid-90s after we bulldozed all of those apartments. There will be a lot of opposition from the neighbors to having any residential come back there, just to let you know.
At least the density.
So, are we looking at this one also?
No, that's a commercial designation, that's a commercial project that's pending over here. And you've got residential here, you've got residential to the south. So the question is whether you're just, and this is a mix of, as mentioned, the area, we've got the issues of crime throughout the sub-area.
There's 2 elementary schools there now.
Right.
And then a lot of vacant land.
This right here is where the soccer field is.
Yes.
Right
Yeah.
here.
And when that soccer field was designed, they forgot they needed parking. And I'll tell you, on the weekends, you can't get near the place. And they're parking in the streets, they're parking in the school lots. If this is commercial area parking, that's where they're going to park. And the poor commercial people are not going to have
I take it back, I don't think this is Arden Guthrie.
No, this is it.
This is the one you're
Here,
thinking of
this
here.
one,
Yeah,
yeah.
this is,
Yeah, pardon
yeah,
me.
exactly.
Yeah, that's the one where
Right.
the residents are opposed to.
Yep.
And then this is why we have, I mean, this is commercial, and it's also, it's a pending project. It's going to be commercial.
It's been
I think
pending
because-
for a long time, yeah.
I'd say because the proximity to the soccer fields and residential makes more sense.
Over here.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's just my.
So the
take on it.
residential designation.
I agree.
Well, and infill, et cetera.
Because on weekends, the traffic to get off is backed up all the way to here.
Yeah, it's always.
And it's a madhouse.
So that's all because of the casino.
I was
Yeah,
gonna
they're-
say,
yeah.
isn't that because of the
casino.
casino?
That's pretty much.
In the weekends, because of the soccer fields.
Okay, we have 2 areas left in this ward, and these are probably easy areas to go to, but it's the areas that you see here, the residential areas here. You will see today, you know, surrounding areas is pretty predominantly, almost all, 100% single-family residential detached units. In these areas here, I'll just put my hands on the areas, but the 2 areas are circled in the map, you will see that there's a mix of sort of orangish colors, and if you single-family residential, so you've got some duplex, you've got some, you know, lower density kinds of residential uses. The current designation zoning in those areas is for residential medium-low, which is about 8, what's residential, I'm sorry to keep bothering you, what residential medium-low is, how many units per acre, 8?
We don't have
I think it's about 8.
the
So
residential.
slightly higher than single-family detached, but it would allow duplexes, possibly quadplexes within the area, allow sort of a mix, but predominantly a single-family character to the area.
That's good.
Are we okay with those designations? Okay,
Is this Highland Avenue?
that's Highland, yes.
And this is not the area. The area we knocked those 4plexes out in was north of Highland, south of Highland, excuse me.
Yeah, it's separate.
I'm looking at the map upside down. I
Yeah,
gotcha.
Okay, let's move on to Ward 3.
My word, but your word, yeah, there's not enough housing.
So Ward 3 is an interesting ward because it's, again, the area south of downtown. And we have a number of sort of, and we talked about some of these sort of ideas before, but let me just sort of begin to start with the mixed-use corridors that we have within Ward 3. The one area that's truly a corridor, we'll talk about D Street and E Street separately, the Mount Vernon. Up here, if you recall, again, this Mount Vernon corridor probably even has more vacant properties than we had in the northern, you know, just north of us previously. And if you remember, what you did there was basically say, you know, again, with the same concerns about being able to effectively build 100% commercial within the area because of the parcel size and depths, et cetera. And it's all zoned commercial today. Again, from the public, we saw neighborhood commercial, pedestrian-oriented commercial, residential mixed densities, and residential height. Those were the 4 ideas that came out through the public workshops for this area. So the notion, et cetera, and again, if you remember, we had the northern portion of Mount Vernon, we talked about concentrating commercial uses at the intersection with, again, mixed-use densities between. So the notion is basically the same idea, a mixed-use designation supporting, if you will, neighborhood-serving commercial uses, promoting commercial uses, and then concentrating the commercial up here near the station and near the depot, which we'll talk about separately in a minute.
Hopefully the bridge will be finished by then.
That was gonna say, isn't there a bridge?
Yeah, because, well, right in here is the bridge, the Mount Vernon Bridge, and it's essential for the mixed use that you're talking about,
Right.
right in here, the development.
To make it work. Yep. So are we okay with that along there? Anybody have any?
No, I think you're fine.
Okay.
This is already in that effect.
So let me move to E Street. We have a number of different segments here. And let me start with, for this ward, remember we have the downtown area. We have the reuse circle of the mall, Carousel Mall. We also have in this area, adjacent to East Street, the stadium, the baseball stadium. We have, just south of this is the Orange Show ground. So there has been some discussion about, and we talked before about the idea of a stadium district rather than turning this into industrial, which the current designation actually is called Commercial Central City, et cetera. But then, though you have scattered industrial types of uses within this area, not the logistics, but the other types of industrial uses. The notion of here that for the committee's consideration with what happens here on D Street is to basically create a district that also ties into the Orange Show. There's some confidential discussions going on about getting something like that to work. In other words, it was described to me as a mini LA Live in terms of a district. So hotels, restaurants, sports-related businesses, et cetera. So you build upon the presence of the stadium, you about reuse and ultimate conversion and, upgrading, if you will, of the Orange Show's grounds for more entertainment-related uses. Is that a good idea?
I believe so.
Okay.
If it will tie with another little mini bridge, walkway, whatever pathway to connect, that would be.
Yeah, and you also then, because you have the transit station right here.
Right.
So you think about the connectivity of the transit station, you think about the connectivity up here to the redevelopment of the mall. So this was what I was commenting earlier, Joel, about this notion of a corridor of urban design corridor of improvements. Again, we're looking at possibly some ideas from Cal Poly Pomona students about how to actually treat this corridor up here that basically pulls things together with sustainable concepts about how you treat landscapes and drainage and capture, stormwater capture and those kinds of things. So what I'm hearing is this is a good idea for this particular district, the stadium district with this here.
Can we guarantee that that's going to happen or be available to happen for the next 20 years, or is someone going to come in and come up and divide it all?
Well, if we designate it for those uses and indicate certain restriction of the types of uses that you would accommodate within that area, nobody can develop without a change of the general plan.
Good.
So, I mean, you're not going to guarantee it's going to happen. You're not going to guarantee the investment.
But a specific plan.
Yeah. You're basically creating capacity.
We're
Remember,
locking
that's what
it
you're
in.
doing. You're now basically notion as well. Okay, so I'll just indicate that we think this is a good idea. Okay, let me move on to then our area to the south on D. This area, of course, what happens here on the Orange Show or whatever happens over here on the mall. The area here to the south, again, west side of the street, this is a transit corridor, as we know, the SBX. We have the west side of the street, you've got some shallow parcels adjacent to the freeway. You have some much deeper parcels on the east side of the street, East Street. So what you have, and there's some mix here, there's some areas in here that you have, if you will, more industrial type of uses, et cetera. Again, today, the zoning is something called Commercial Central City, et cetera. So again, I don't know if I have an actual definition, Commercial Central City. Either of you, any of you?
Commercial, we used to.
That's why you're zoning these
The zoning is, but not the zoning.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, the notion was, what we heard from the public was mixed use with housing. Commercial is the zoning. Again, the notion of these parcels with the size and scale gives you the opportunity, if you have something happening here, you have something happening here, you have something happening here, you have this over here. It's whether or not you begin to think about this is very good just for commercial.
I think it would be just for commercial, because the noise level from here, and I can tell you, it's heard all the way to the south.
You okay with that?
The freeway noise level?
Oh, yeah. The Orange Show always has all these events going on.
Anthem raves.
Whatever they are. And
They have
even
difference.
they're massively loud, you can hear them all the way across to the other
There's an
side.
acoustical tunnel with the creek bed that runs.
So I don't think housing would be appropriate. Maybe commercial, mixed use, or, I don't know, urban.
Now, Ray's, I mean, that would be a
Yeah,
city issue,
well-
whether they're going to allow that there.
But this is also the,
And it's gonna be.
this is also flight plan into,
Yeah.
into San Bernardino.
Yeah.
It's coming right through here like this.
Right here.
Because the orange shows the state fair, the city's very limited in what it can
Do in that.
do in that particular area. So
But this area right here, you don't want residential.
Yeah, I agree.
Right, exactly.
Which will be
I
coming
agree,
in.
because you can hear it for miles.
So we're
Well, no,
okay,
not just that, but all the big jets coming into San Bernardino.
That's true, that's
Come
true.
right through there.
so we're okay with commercial?
Yes.
That may change though, because there is negotiations going on about selling the orange show.
Yeah.
Woody, Rancho Cucamonga has a similar thing as ours. Do they have like a baseball, is there like a district, they run that their stadium that you're aware of?
I'm not aware of that, but I do know of the district that they have over there, but they have some very strict land use controls on
Yeah,
that.
they do, yeah, they do.
And I don't, if I'm trying to remember the year, I believe there was some original redevelopment work that went into that back
Yeah,
when we had
this-
redevelopment agencies.
These were two separate areas. This was Central City North Redevelopment Agency and Central City South Redevelopment Agency. And there were special rules and regulations put in commensurate with those designations.
I'm gonna check out their stadium and the district around that stadium. That's Rancho Cucamonga Stadium.
Okay.
Tremors or
Is it the storm?
the Storm? I forget the name of the baseball team.
So we've talked about the stadium, we've talked about Mount Vernon.
Oops,
I
Spirit.
don't want to do that.
I can't remember.
It was the Spirit for a while.
The Spirit,
Spirit.
yeah.
San Bernardino Spirit for quite a
Yeah,
while.
storms.
So let's move off to the west, the area by Valley College. There is a vacant piece of property right here. I think there had been some consideration originally about the college acquiring that property for student housing. The dilemma, and so housing seemed to make sense and create a residential village, et cetera, a campus village. The property has now been, we understand, acquired by the railroad.
By the who?
Railroad, for commercial development.
The railroad?
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, that's what we understand. So our thoughts, do we still want to try to focus housing on that area and say railroad, if you're going to develop that property, you need to develop for housing?
I
Or
think
would we
so.
allow
Don't even
commercial, or
exactly
would we think
railroad.
about promoting commercial on that site?
I honestly think anywhere where there's college students,
You need housing.
you need housing.
Okay. Are we okay with that?
Yeah.
But this is a JC, it's not a state college.
No, but junior colleges are now developing housing adjacent
Are
to
they?
it because of the issue of housing, student housing is a dilemma statewide.
Okay.
And the community
I'm
college
dealing with that.
district has basically said, wherever we can, let's promote the development of housing adjacent to our campuses.
Okay, all right.
And between Tennessee, San Bernardino, and Loma Linda University, they're taking over San Bernardino.
Has it changed? I thought junior colleges pretty much taught the people in the area and are going to live at home.
Yeah.
Are they coming from out of the area to a JC?
They're coming out of the
They're
area. I have
starting to-
international students
Okay, a lot of
coming
international.
from different parts of the country, states.
Why did the railroad
Really?
acquire the land?
I don't
House
know.
students.
They wanted to develop a rail line down to the former Norton Air Force Station, Airport Authority, and having a connection from the Santa Fe, the old Santa Fe yards down to the Norton for those boxes, those big boxes that they moved.
So right now, we'll proceed on, and we may hear differently later, but we'll proceed with a residential designation that's really student-oriented as well. The next area here is this mix of a little bit of everything.
Are they going to acquire a take, because now it's already zoned, I mean,
Is it?
commercial, and we're going to zone for housing?
We're recommending housing adjacent to the campus.
Yeah. Or at least a small one. It doesn't have to be a large.
So the area to the east of this, here's the college, the freeway is here. There is this, you've got residential here, and then you have an area that has some housing, some industrial, some commercial, and some vacant properties. It's currently zoned, all of this except this little square right here. Today the zoning is industrial for all of this. This little square is zoned residential medium. et cetera, even though there's, as I said, residential in here. So your consideration in this area, et cetera, is sort of beginning to think about what this area should be in the future. Should it be all promoted for industrial in the future, which then basically bookends this residential area here? Or should it be, some have suggested housing, maybe an opportunity. This would be an appropriate location for student housing, et cetera. When we are, from the residents and community workshops, we heard mixed use, commercial pedestrian oriented, commercial neighborhood, and residential high. So again, we heard an equal kind of mix of ideas from the public regarding this particular area as well.
Is any of that housing now prior non-conforming use, or is it all still?
It would be non-conforming use in that situation.
Prior, yeah. Is that it now, the way it is now, or is that what you're?
That's what it is now, because we have an industrial zoning now.
What I don't want to see is any kind of restriction from the college expanding. I just want to see that get bigger and bigger.
Well, you're not going to go, you've got some decent housing, if you will, in this area, and so you're probably likely not to move in this direction of the college itself.
They can go up, though.
So, you know, if this are housing, it could complement, indeed, the residential neighborhood, student housing. The dilemma with housing here, again, you're adjacent to freeway, and freeway adjacency in housing with noise and air pollution and other kinds of things, other than, I guess, if you're downtown LA at the interchange, is probably questionable.
I've seen some housing on the side of the freeways.
Mm-hmm.
I think that area is in the flight path.
This property is purchased by BNSF, the railroad company.
Isn't this area underneath the flight pattern of the old the airport? But I think that's where I see those planes going over every day now. I might be wrong, but I think that's part of it.
Orange that way? The airport.
The airport, yeah, airports.
Over here.
Over here?
They come this way.
Planes. Very noisy right there.
So thoughts? Planners? Staff, do you have a recommendation?
For which location? Somebody wants to say mixed use anymore?
I would say
Keep it existing.
Affirmative action, doesn't it?
housing.
Housing, yeah.
Why don't you keep it existing?
I think
They can always
it's
change it down the
already
road.
housing.
The colleges would benefit from it.
Yeah.
So we're okay with housing?
Yeah.
High density.
And obviously you create the
It gives the college an incentive to move, locate.
Even though it's a junior college, it's a start. When they get up to boys' university, it's actually.
Whatever happened there? You get counts up kind of.
This is interesting.
You gotta start somewhere.
Okay. A couple of other areas we have, and some of these I think will go quickly, especially from earlier discussion. This area east of the stadium, right now it's designated heavy commercial. The heavy commercial was thinking of this, these are smaller scale parcels. They're not the size of your logistics industries further to the east. These are not big box kinds of uses. You'll see the parcels are smaller. The notion of that kind of use was this is where you might even have an arts district ultimately. In other words, artists can come in, incubate it, or an incubator kind of use. So you would have smaller scale kinds of buildings that might be supportive of that kind of use.
On the other side of Orange Show.
Yeah, well, Orange Shores is here.
Right.
So you're northeast of Orange Show. This is the area which would be the entertainment district. Here's E Street, and then you're basically, you see this east, this pattern, there's some vacant parcels. There's some small commercial within the area, a couple of small pockets of residential in the area, and it's predominantly kind of smaller industrial service kinds of buildings.
Yeah, there's a lot of industrial. It's heavy industrial.
Again, the note is this would not be This would not be the big industry, or the big logistics industry. The idea, again, is this is a place, if you're an incubator, you come out of Cal State and you're trying to find a small place, cheap place to rent and incubate an industry. It's like Silicon Valley, started in the garages and those kinds of small business locations as well. So are we okay with keeping it that kind of idea, the basic, okay?
Well, the thing too, I mean, those are large lots. Those are very large lots.
In here?
Yeah.
Yes.
There's some very small lots in there.
Well, down on the southern part,
Yeah, there's mixed. There's some that are
Not all of them.
bigger.
Up here is larger. Sort of this eastern portion right here is larger, northeastern portion. So again, it would not restrict the size, but it would basically be an emphasis upon those kinds of industries. Okay. And again, arts-related kinds of uses, et cetera. Okay, we have these, and this one is probably going to take us about 2 minutes, a minute. We have these areas that are largely mix of vacant and some residential scattered in the flight path to the airport. We had some in the community say this should continue to be residential. And I think there's, this is an area that probably from a professional consulting standpoint should be industrial. Yep.
I think.
Agree. We're okay
Or
with that?
commercial too. I mean, close to the airport, a lot of people have to stop.
The amount of commercial, your commercial in these kinds of areas, you see like these, are going to be scattered kind of pockets. And so I don't have that on here of the North Airport plan, but they have a node in a cluster of commercial designated for that area. So I think this notion, you would allow kind of what I would call the service supporting commercial, et cetera, within an industrial area like this. But the predominant use I think we'd be talking about would be industrial. That make sense? Okay. Okay, a couple of other areas. Through Ward 6. And this is the area up here. This is an area, here is the area we talked about with this heavier, with this sort of incubator, industrial, smaller parcels, et cetera. It's sort of an island of residential, abutted by commercial on the west. We have the channel here. To the south is industrial. You basically are infilling with industrial to the east. Today it is single family with a couple of smaller apartments or multifamily within the area. The current designation is residential medium. So the question is, do you really keep that as residential medium, or will you basically say it should convert to industrial over time?
Residential pockets on Waterman and Redlands.
Yeah, this is the area on here that is this one right down here. Right down. Oops, residential. No, that's not this one. It's this one here.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, 3J.
3J.
Now then.
So your thoughts?
Keep it.
Keep it as residential?
Yeah.
Okay. It's good not to lose residential these days. for our numbers.
This ward needs a little more residential.
Okay, then south, then we have the area down here at the southern end of the city. That is basically, we have the freeway, we have Arrowhead, I believe, coming down here. And you basically have on 2 sides industrial, you have some commercial, and then you have this pocket of residential. The western portion today, this portion here, they'll say this is where the line is, that portion today is designated for regional commercial. This is designated for industrial, but it's residential today. So our thoughts about that in the future?
Is that by the church?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
So keeping it residential?
I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Then our last 2 areas here, the question of whether or not we would ask in the Commerce Center area would allow residential infill mixed in with the commercial. Again, this is probably one of the healthiest, if you will, in terms of attracting commercial development.
What
Would you
street
want to
is this?
preclude that?
What street is that in, Lisa?
Is Hospitality Lane?
Hospitality Lane's right there.
Right here, right?
Right there.
Yeah.
Arrowhead's right here.
Right, right,
And the river.
okay. Allow for mixed use, mixed use?
That was the question. Some have said, the question is housing, or do we keep it exclusively for commercial?
I say
I think it's-
commercial. Commercial.
Yeah, I think you're still too close to the bike paths.
Yeah.
Okay. So keeping it commercial?
Yeah.
I think, yes.
Okay.
I think it is.
Then our last area is this area immediately to the east of Commerce Center. It's an area that, again, it's got older residential, probably some of the lowest priced housing in the city. Some suggested that over time this moved to the east. Others said we really need to keep the supply of housing for the community in terms of residential.
And it's all
Agreed?
housing now.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's a low density, but yes.
It's low density.
You don't want-
Okay.
You don't want to make it higher density?
Yeah, I would love for it to be
Yeah,
higher density, especially over here. What is this, Hospitality Lane?
Right now,
Yeah.
what was that, Harold, down there on Colston? What was the,
There was 10 units on that property.
no, but what was the, you remember what the
This one right
general
here.
plan designation was down there?
Urban.
Urban, how many units an acre does that have? 8?
It's not very high density.
So maybe what's the next step up?
Go to a medium, residential medium, which is about
Yeah, I think that makes more sense.
Maybe a median, where we go higher?
medium.
There's a lot of, they're long, deep lots,
Yeah, they look.
They are.
and there's a lot of vacant lots, and a lot of those, the ones that do have a house on there, they're a small home, you know, maybe 1,000 square feet or so, no garage kind of a thing, and so there
They
are
have land.
opportunities for assemblages there.
Yeah, so again, you think about the idea, again, linking in, this could again be pedestrian-oriented kind of connections and clusters of housing here, higher density housing, and again, provide and support what's happening there for both employees of Commerce Center as well. Okay? We have one ward, we may actually get through all 3 wards. Let's move on to Ward 4, and let me just move this out. And we have few areas in Ward 4, so this may make our lives simple.
Street and Kendall Drive.
Okay, Ward 4. So in Ward 4, we have basically 2 centers shown here and 1 quarter shown here as well. So this is Ward 4, yeah, right down here. So let's start with the west end. This is Kendall and 40th. And basically what we heard here was this is a node of activity for the surrounding area where people can come. This is your village center, if you want to use that terminology as well, attracting people, because you don't have a lot of commercial. They tend to be concentrated in centers of this part of town. So the notion is, again, what we heard from the community was mixed-use center, residential medium low, commercial, pedestrian, et cetera. Today, the current zoning is this blue area, sort of wedge, is residential medium. This is commercial in the area as well. So the thought was basically to reflect the basic zoning, keep this as sort of a village center for that part of town where the roads intersect as well. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I think so, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, I travel.
This is
through,
all
yeah.
communities, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And then this is green space.
Exactly. And then east of there, at Sierra Way, which is this, you've got, again, a concentration, a cluster of greater amount of commercial. You have some little pockets abutting it that are multifamily units, et cetera. So in other words, they've taken that idea of concentrating your housing nearby, not a huge area, but there are some parcels there that have that multifamily designation. So it creates sort of, again, this idea of a village center where you've got people living close to where the shopping is as well. And it's a neighborhood serving kind of area in both cases. Again, the community said residential medium, commercial neighborhood, commercial highway. So are we comfortable with this notion of being a center, neighborhood center that basically with the abutting residential.
Is this Taylor Village right here?
Yeah, yes.
Yes, absolutely, I agree.
Yeah,
I would
I
agree.
agree.
It all works good right now.
Good right now, yeah, Taylor. Taylor works good.
And now the one area left for today is the area, and we do have some one other areas. This is Patton. This is then Highland. We have this property right down here is a piece of property that's been acquired by the tribe. So just that's a note for us to just leave, basically, at this point in time. But then we have these properties to the east along Highland up to basically where it's split off to the mountains, et cetera. You've got some commercial uses. There is the opportunity, some of these properties are underutilized today, et cetera, to say the least. From the community, we heard vertical mixed use. We heard mixed use with the Central Park, lower level designated park, residential medium. It's all zoned commercial today. So again, the basic question for the committee is, would this be an area you'd allow housing to be added to?
Mixed use, yeah.
Okay.
I think.
So this would be a mixed-use center kind of designation. Okay. Now, our last area are the green areas, at the foothills. We had a lot of people saying open space. Our dilemma in a general plan, unless the piece of property is publicly owned, we cannot create an open space designation because it's a taking of private property. So currently, this has, all areas have a residential low designation, which I believe is 1 to 3 units per acre, something of that nature.
3.5.
3.5, okay. So the question is whether 3.5 or you'd want to go to a lower density designation in this area, creating a newer rural designation that might be more like 1 unit per acre. Still would allow property owners to consider development in the area, but it would reduce the maximum capacity of development in the area. Again, reminding you that these areas are impacted high fire. We've got earthquake faults and other potential issues.
I keep it 1 acre.
Keep it 1 acre? Would that be the 1 unit per acre?
Yeah, but even
Comfortable
1
with that?
acre,
That's
some of
what-
the stuff's so steep that you couldn't put a house on 1
Yeah,
acre.
that's the other.
It's
No,
unlikely.
but you have to grade.
You'd have to cluster it.
You have to.
Woody,
It's unlikely.
does the state law regulate how much you're able to go from, like if it's 3.5, go down to 1? Is there a limitation on the amount of density you can reduce it by?
I don't think that we'd be affected by no net loss on these units. Okay. But we'll verify that. Because this is not providing us a lot of housing capacity in our numbers.
I just wonder about the taking part.
Yeah, well, you can, as long as you allow a single unit on a privately owned piece of property, whether it's even 40 acres, and you allow that single unit, you miss the issue of a taking for private property.
Yeah. They can turn around and put ADUs on it.
Yep.
They can, they'll have a 1 acre and they'll be able to expand to other ADUs or granny houses or whatever they want to do.
So we're okay with 1 acre per acre? Yep. Okay, we'll start, and then we'll look at the issue that I think that as you start looking at. So, congratulations, you got your 3 awards here tonight. We next meeting have awards 6 and 7.
5,
And then just let you know where we're going on this. What we'll be doing is we will be taking all of your input, and in our 2 meetings from now, what we'll be bringing back to you is a map with land use designations on it. See, did we get this corrected? Do you want to indeed say, this is our map, our preliminary, I always use the term preliminary recommendation, that we would then vet through public review. Okay? Good, you're making good progress, so congratulations on this as well.
What's next meeting?
The next meeting,
the 30th,
Month,
go ahead.
the end of the
it's
month.
the 30th.
30th.
June 30th?
Yeah.
Right there, 30th.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
3 weeks.
The eve before
we
the
adjourning?
biggest 3-day weekend of the summer.
But it is the middle of the week, the end of the week, that's true.
I did.
I guess we're done.
We're not done until I...
There you go.
Okay.
Let's see, any,
Policy report. Wasn't it?
Are we having fun yet?
yeah, it's a lot of fun. Let's see, are there any reports or announcements by the General Plan Advisory Committee? Any reports or announcements? No. And then I guess we go into the director's report.
There is nothing new to report. So we look forward to the next meeting, which is on, what do we have, Stephanie? The June 30th.
Okay, is that it?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Then if there be no other business, except that the next regular meeting of the General Plan Advisory Committee will be held on Thursday, June 30th, 2022 at 6 p.m. at the same location. I call for an adjournment of the meeting.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
Thank you.
All by consensus. Whoops.
Good job.